Hello and welcome to the ICT Newscast. I'm Polly Dinetclaw. President Donald Trump delivered his first joint address to Congress on March 4th, a record-breaking 1 hour and 40 minutes. His speech wasn't considered a State of the Union address because his presidential terms weren't in succession. With tariffs, layoffs, and a shaky stock market sparking concerns, how does this impact Indian country? Jordan Bennett-Begay leads a roundtable discussion with Holly Cook-Macarro, principal at the Angle, and Michael Stopp, president and CEO of Seven Star Holdings.
Thank you for being here, Holly and Mike. Welcome to the show. Mike, you're in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Reservation Economic Summit. What is the mood there now? Is there anything new coming out of the summit?
Well, good morning, Jordan. Thanks so much for having us. Before I get into that, I just want to take a moment and recognize the work that Holly did in the last few months of the Biden administration and her advocacy for Leonard Peltier and how important that was. Holly, thank you so much for the work that you've done. Seeing him being pardoned and being released, I think, was a huge event for everyone in Indian country, regardless of their political background.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate that. It was a huge team effort over decades and generations, and I was happy to be able to help bring it across the finish line. But thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
I think there's still a lot of optimism here at Res. It is the biggest Res that we've seen. I was talking to Chris James, who was running it, and there's a lot of optimism about what's coming in Indian country. There are challenges. There's some confusion with the current administration, the policies they're making. But I think in general, what I'm hearing, it's still a very optimistic event that we're having here. There's some questions. Obviously, there's not as many government employees or government speakers as we've had in the past because there's some challenges with that where they've cut back on budgets, specifically traveling budgets and things like that. And they're not really sure what to say yet while DOGE goes through its process. And we're looking at what this administration is going to do in the next few months.
And then Holly, since Mike even mentioned it, Leonard Peltier's release, I know that was done just minutes before President Trump got inaugurated and, Biden's final, minutes. Can you explain, how do you feel now?
I still sometimes am processing, I was so much in the thick of it there at the end, processing that Leonard is finally free and at home. And it's a beautiful thing to see someone who was unjustly imprisoned for 49 years and make that reentry and reconnect with family and friends and loved ones. And it's been really tremendous. It's a beautiful thing.
That's good to hear. And so, Mike, you just mentioned it too. I think there's a lot of confusion, and I can only imagine what the energy is like there at Res with the DOGE cuts. And this also impacted, Indian Health Service, the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Education, and then other tribal programs across federal agencies. And then on top of that, the Department of Government Efficiency is working to eliminate approximately 750 land leases, right, that also affect BIA, IHS, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife offices across the country, all of which, serve and work for tribal nations. I guess the question is, there are some people that say government waste, there is government waste, but the way they're going about it is very abrupt and not analytical. Can there be bipartisan support for these cuts at all?
We know that we're in a tough spot in our fiscal nature at the federal government. And so we've waited on Congress to make decisions. They haven't done it. The people were very clear about what they want to see. I will say that DOGE is a little more blunt an instrument than what I was expecting and what a lot of people were expecting. And we've got some folks in there who don't have government history. They've got their Silicon Valley folks who understand technology. They understand the need to make changes. And they're just going in there with a very broad sword. We are seeing that Congress is reacting to that and trying to make some more precise changes. And I think as people start to see this bluntness come through, they're going to say, all right, yes, we need to make changes, but let's do it in a different fashion. Again, we're very early into this administration. I know there's a lot of disruption, but we were spending $8 trillion a year, which is double what we were when I worked in Congress about 5 years ago. We needed to make changes, and it is a real challenge to make anything happen in Washington I think this is going to make change, and we're going to see some challenges, and it's going to be painful in the process. It is. That's just how it's going to be. It's the federal government. There is a lot of inefficiency. With an $8 trillion government, even if the federal government was running at 95% efficiency, that's still wasting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars. So there needs to be changes. But I think it's very important now that tribal leaders continue their advocacy to all the elected leaders in Washington.
You asked whether there could be bipartisan support for any of this. I think that's going to be a really high bar. What I do think that we could gain bipartisan support for, and what would be really helpful to Indian country, is if there were an administration-wide policy that was established that recognized the trust and treaty obligations of the United States government, and as a result, these agencies and the funds that go with them. If it were administration wide, we wouldn't have to fight each of these battles, whether it's at ag with food programs, at interior with leases, all of these pieces. It's a separate battle every day for tribal leaders on each individual issue, and trying to educate everyone across the board in kind of a repetitive manner, to be honest with you, is really a lot of work, really very stressful on a program level. But it would be a great thing, I think, if this administration put forth an administration-wide policy that recognized those trust and treaty obligations, and that I think we would have bipartisan support for as well from the Hill.
I think that's a very important point, and I think some of that is starting to happen. I know that I personally have a lot of faith in Secretary Burgum. He does have a voice and understands Indian issues. Again, this is early in the administration. There's folks that are going to be appointed to these positions, like William Kirkland, who's going to be the assistant secretary, who'd be a voice for these things that aren't in place yet because things are moving so quickly, which is a challenge. But President Trump came in and said this is what he's going to do, and that's what he's doing. But I think as we start to see some of these lower level appointments that come into place, especially the assistant secretary and the IHS director who understand a lot of these issues, will help do exactly what Holly said and explain to the rest of the administration how important these Native programs are.
And that's all the time we have. Thank you, Holly and Mike, for your time and energy today.
Thanks for having us.
Good to see you.
In Wisconsin, one university is investing in Native students and honoring its history. UW-Madison sits on Ho-Chunk ancestral land and is giving back through the Wisconsin Tribal Educational Promise. The program covers full tuition, housing, and fees for Native undergraduates and offers tuition waivers for Native law and medical students. ICT's Erica AEC, in partnership with PBS Wisconsin's Here and Now, examines how this initiative supports Native students and recognizes UW-Madison's history as a land-grant university.
It means a lot to me and my people, my community, the Native community. We are still here. We're still fighting for our right to be here.
Riley Aguirre is a freshman at the University of Wisconsin's Madison campus.
Education was used as assimilation to get rid of our culture, our language, our traditions, but now it's used as a way of teaching.
She's an enrolled member of the Oneida Nation and attending the university at no cost to her or her family, using the Wisconsin Tribal Education Promise program.
How would your family have paid for college otherwise?
Other scholarships, definitely. Applying for scholarships outside of the school to help me as well, and probably funding through the tribe as well.
The Wisconsin Tribal Education Promise program provides financial support for students who are enrolled in one of the state's 11 federally recognized tribes. Carla Viju, Tribal Relations Director of UW-Madison, says the university wants to make the Madison campus more accessible to Native students.
We worked with tribal leaders from across the state to create the program, and now we're seeing the fruits of those labors. We're seeing our first class. We've got nearly 80 students in this first class, and we're hoping it will grow from here.
Tuition, housing, books, and all other school-related fees totaling about $30,000 are covered for undergraduate Native students through the Promise program.
It's not a taxpayer-funded program, and we're pretty proud that people want to support this program.
The program is funded through private donations. Wayuu says the legal precedent surrounding federally recognized tribes is a specific eligibility requirement for the students applying to the program.
Federally recognized tribes are sovereign nations who determine citizenship, and so that's a political classification. It's not a race or ethnicity.
Schools in nearly all 50 states offer some type of financial assistance for Native students.
The program's unique. It includes medical students and law students. Tell me more about that.
We are hearing from people across the country, even in particular, about that law aspect. There's a lot of excitement around the law school.
Joseph Cornelius is Oneida. His father is a UW-Madison law school graduate who was worried about school loans for his son.
Initially, we were thinking that some of it would probably have to come out of my pockets or his pockets, and the fact that it was like, no worries, now I just have to worry about school, get good grades, and then it's all smooth sailing.
Undergraduate recipients of the Tribal Promise are reserved one wing of dorms inside the Smith Residence Hall. There's also an Indigenous Student Center close by that hosts tribal student groups like One Chic.
But I'd say the One Chic House and Indigenous program have done a really good job at promoting the diversity here.
Wayuu says the university wants to do what's right for Wisconsin's Native people, considering the university is on Native land belonging to the Ho-Chunk, also known as the people of the Big Voice.
This is Ho-Chunk ancestral land, and I think there's now some sense of pride in that and wanting to share and celebrate that history. But there's also, with this promise, a chance to give back too.
The University of Wisconsin's Madison campus extends over 900 acres of land, including a 4-mile stretch of shoreline along Lake Mendota. But this land is the ancestral home to the Ho-Chunk Nation, the Native people who were living here for over 10,000 years. Through a series of treaties, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede or give up this land to the state of Wisconsin and the federal government.
The 1837 treaty wasn't a revered treaty at all. These are forced agreements to cede our land, such as that particular treaty, move west of the Mississippi, and relinquish our ownership over our historic homes.
John Greendeer, president of Ho-Chunk Nation, says the final treaty with the government was signed under duress.
We had 8 months to vacate, but then we didn't. And in the coldest parts of the winter, they shipped us in rail cars across to the neutral ground, and we suffered a lot for that.
Ho-Chunk were given $1.5 million for their land, but the government put most of it into interest-bearing trusts, leaving Ho-Chunk next to nothing.
I don't think any representatives of authority could walk away from one of those agreements and say they were the beneficiary of something.
Most of the Wisconsin Native tribes were forcibly moved to reservations, but Ho-Chunk people are spread across the state, with over 7,000 currently enrolled members. Greendeer says the treaties of the past are significant to their sovereignty of the present.
The treaties gave way to a lot and substantiated our abilities to negotiate not only with local governments, but also later on with these other little governments that were starting up with the education campuses with the UW.
Ho-Chunk had already surrendered this part of their land in an 1832 treaty, paving the way for UW-Madison to be built in 1848. Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act in 1862, selling 1.3 million acres of tribal land in Wisconsin and using the proceeds to create so-called land-grant universities. And so today, the tuition promise extends to Native students across the state, a promise Greendeer calls late but fitting.
I think the Wisconsin Promise is a very old promise that is finally getting kept, at least at the UW level, at least at the college level.
108 years after the last treaty was signed, Robert Powless, an Oneida man, became the first Native to graduate from UW-Madison. Ada Deer, a Menominee Native, was the first woman. For Aguirre, a free university education on Native soil is personal.
Our education is not only for me, but for our community and for the resiliency of my ancestors. We fought so long through so many generations of trauma and abuse and neglect, and being here is like resiliency.
They were forcibly removed, and this university has spent some time coming to accept and share that story. And part of the reason this promise exists is because, there is some recognition that that all happened, but there's also, the need and want to do what's right and good for Native people too.
A heritage marker was erected on UW-Madison's campus to recognize the ancestral home of Ho-Chunk. It's near Bascom Hill, which sits on top an effigy or burial mound built by Native people over 1,000 years ago. A series of 12 Ho-Chunk Circle Clan sculptures are outside the Baki Recreation and Wellbeing Center.
The promise is intended to be forever, right? I mean, Native American students have been around, since the beginning of what is now the United States, been around since the inception of what is now this country, and I think the goal is to make sure that they're taken care of forever.
Both students are looking to use their education to better their communities.
I kind of want to go into wealth management or some maybe sustainability.
And amplify Native voices.
I do want to go into some field where I can be an advocate for possibly my tribe or other people, but definitely Native people as a whole, and getting our voices out there to be heard.
Reporting from Madison Ho-Chunk lands, I'm Erica Aisi for Here and Now and ICT.
Chi Escalingwat. Chi Escalingwat. I'm happy-minded. I'm happy-minded.
In Maine, a tribe is celebrating a major Landback victory, regaining stewardship of forest, wetlands, and river frontage. One official called the parcel a near-perfect piece of land for the tribe. Stuart Huntington has more.
The acreage involved is not small.
The single transaction almost doubled our tribal land holdings.
The Holton Band of Maliseet Indians recently regained the more than 1,300 acres abutting tribal land in Monticello, Maine.
The parcel is immediately adjacent to our Wilderness Pines campground. It sits on 3.5 miles of river frontage on the north branch of the Meduxnequig River, which is a critical feature to the Maliseet people, being a riverine tribe.
The Landback effort was aided by First Light Learning Journey, the Nature Conservancy, and the Conservation Fund.
The acreage is home to some rare plant species. It has migratory waterfowl habitat. It's got a number of traditional plants, medicinal plants, the brown ash, black ash that the tribe uses for basketry. It's really almost the perfect piece of land for the tribe. It's nearby and it has all the resources that the tribe holds dear.
In some ways, this land return effort dates back 7 years to when First Light first approached the tribe with a novel idea: getting behind Indigenous leadership.
That's been an amazing journey. Awkward doesn't even begin to describe what that initial meeting was. And they said, "Hi, we want to come help you." And it was like, "You want to help us do what?" There have been so many times when the tribe's been approached by individuals, by organizations, say, "Hi, we want to work with you." And all they want to do is take, or they come in and they talk and then they disappear. And what was different about this group was they kept coming back. They've just opened up some doors and helped us knock down some of the prejudices that are out there when it comes to acquiring land.
The First Light folks think their approach is right for Western land conservation organizations and maybe others.
For that community to put Indigenous people in the center is just so important, and I think that is essential across our world, because the same things that work in the sort of conservation space, working with Indigenous leadership, are going to be what help us all survive, right? The planet drives the show, right? So if we're not taking care of the planet, all those other pieces of our lives don't really matter.
For ICT, I'm Stuart Huntington.
In the wake of climate change, countries are looking to leave fossil fuels in the past and adopt renewable forms of energy. But what happens when these renewable energy projects affect sacred land? In Colombia, the Wayuu community is facing that reality.
Giant wind turbines tower over a cemetery sacred to the indigenous Wayuu community, native to the La Guajira region in northern Colombia. This arid, windswept region dotted with cacti and roaming herds of goats holds immense potential to position Colombia as a wind and solar energy leader. Developing wind projects in Guajira is key to guaranteeing a reliable supply of electricity in Colombia, says Margarita Nieves, founder of Colombian Offshore Wind Research Network and La Guajira native.
Colombia tiene una necesidad de contar con fuentes renovables de energía, fuentes de
Colombia has a need for renewable sources of energy, sources of electricity, and in wind energy, the country's continental land area has a potential of 25 gigawatts, and in La Guajira alone, there is a potential of 18 gigawatts. That means most of that potential is in La Guajira. However, resistance from the Wayuu community has stalled many proposed projects by multinational companies and the government. The Wayuu have concerns about the environmental and cultural impacts and the lack of prior consultation in what's one of the nation's poorest regions.
Eso está muy cerquita y del cementerio de Wayuu.
Those wind turbines are too close to our Wayuu cemetery. We fear that over time, that underground energy can eventually damage this cemetery because they're too close. Plus, the companies don't want to give us a share of the benefits. Now, these companies are also eyeing the region's offshore wind farm prospects. Companies are now carrying out studies for offshore wind farms, which is also enraging the Wayuu, especially traditional fishers known as Apalanchi. The government says no one owns the sun or the air. That's true, but they're harming us. How does this benefit us? We are Colombians, but we are in a state of abandonment. The region could generate approximately 15 gigawatts of wind energy, according to Colombia's Mining and Energy Planning Unit, which could power up to an estimated 37.5 million homes annually. It's part of Colombia's just energy transition, aiming to replace fossil fuels with renewables while supporting vulnerable groups like indigenous peoples.
El problema en La Guajira es que es un departamento muy pobre.
The problem in La Guajira is that it's a very poor region with a high rate of unmet basic needs, and the most potential for these projects is located in indigenous reservations that are sacred or constitutionally protected areas belonging to the Wayuu community, which is the largest indigenous group in Colombia. So any activity to be developed in their territories must have a prior consultation and the prior informed consent of these communities. The Wayuu say this isn't happening. Construction started on the La Guajira 1 wind farm, which looms over the cemetery near Cabo de la Vela in 2020 after a mix of legal processes, government backing, and controversial negotiations and unsatisfactory prior consultation. It faced significant opposition from the Wayuu and has been producing electricity since 2022.
Se usan de nobleza de uno Wayuu.
Companies take advantage of the Wayuu's nobility. A lot of the population preserve traditional, semi-nomadic ways of living on rancherias, which are thatched-like roof huts made from dried cacti and mud, herd cattle and goats, and many are armed. They also have a traditional governance system and laws based on their cultural and spiritual practices. Critics warn that the government's push to expedite approvals for other developments could escalate tensions.
¿Qué ha pasado en los últimos 20 años en Colombia en materia
What has happened in the last 20 years in Colombia in terms of wind energy and in La Guajira? Well, only 3 wind farms have been built, one of which is being dismantled, as I was saying. While, for example, in other countries, such as Brazil, 1,000 wind farms have been built. Social issues have begun to spook companies, with 57 planned projects stalled, according to Indepas, a Bogotá-based development organization with extensive research on the matter. While some projects are Colombian, the majority involve international companies from Brazil, Europe, the US, and Canada. The region is home to Cerrejón, one of the largest open pit coal mines in the world and a major player in Latin America's mining sector, which has been in operation since 1985. The mine has just 9 years left in its lifespan, and its closure, without alternative plans in place, will deal a significant blow to the region's economy. For ICT, Daniel Herrera Carbajal.
One of Canada's first Indigenous women lawyers, Marion Ironquill Meadmore, passed on February 19th. Meadmore co-founded Canada's first Indian and Métis Friendship Centre in 1959, helping to establish a network that became the heartbeat of urban Indigenous communities. A founding member of the National Indian Council, she helped lay the foundation for the Assembly of First Nation and the Native Council of Canada. Meadmore also broke barriers as an athlete and later received the Order of Canada, the country's second highest honor. She was 89. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.